The Secretary of Health and Human Services has waded into the politically charged issue of birth control for younger girls. In a very public and high-level disagreement, Kathleen Sebelius today blocked the Food and Drug Administration from allowing girls under 17 to buy the Plan B morning after pill without a prescription. For the details, we're joined by Rob Stein, covering the issue for the Washington Post. Rob, so fill in what's happened here. This is the HHS Secretary overruling her own FDA.
Right. This was a big surprise, a real shock. I mean, nobody knew what the FDA was going to do, but nobody expected the Secretary for Health and Human Services to overturn the decision by the FDA. What happened was the FDA Commissioner, Margaret Hamburg, reviewed the evidence and decided, yeah, it was okay to approve this company's request to sell Plan B basically on any stores, in grocery stores, drug stores, right next to condoms or spermicides. But Secretary Sebelius stepped in and said, no, I just don't agree with that decision.
Now, just remind us the state of play here. Plan B has already been approved for use without prescription by women over 17, right? So what was this about?
Right. Right now, the way it works is that if any woman who's 17 years old or older can walk into a pharmacy and buy Plan B without a prescription, but they have to prove that their age to the pharmacist. But anybody younger than that still has to get a prescription. And women's health advocates, family planning advocates had hoped to make it easier to get so that any women of any age could go in and get it without a prescription. It would make it a lot easier to prevent unwanted pregnancies.
And as a practical matter, that means it's not sold just out there on the shelves. It's behind the counter.
Right. And what often happens is you'll have a situation where, you know, a woman has unprotected sex or has a problem with a condom or maybe is even a rape victim, you know, in the middle of the night or on the weekend, and there's sort of a panic about what to do about it. And with this drug, it's very important that you take it within the first 72 hours. That's the period of time in which it's most effective.
So what was the reasoning by Secretary Sebelius in blocking the change?
You know, she basically said that she just didn't feel that there was enough conclusive evidence to show that it could be used safely by girls of any age. And she specifically cited, you know, that girls as young as 11 years old can get pregnant, and she just didn't feel comfortable that there was enough evidence that young girls 11, 12 years old, really could handle this on their own.
Now, this is, of course, a highly charged political and cultural issue. What kind of pressures were being brought to bear on all health officials in this case?
Yeah, there was a lot of opposition to relaxing the restrictions on Plan B. A lot of conservative activist groups, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and a lot of groups like that were very much opposed to it. They said that they thought that it was unsafe and that young girls and women could not use it safely. They were worried about it encouraging sexual activity. They were worried that by skipping a doctor's visits, that, you know, girls who had STDs wouldn't be picked up. So there were a lot of concerns on the other side.
And then when the decision came out today, plenty of reaction from supporters of it, including, I saw former FDA official Susan Wood suggesting that politics had overruled science here.
Right. The proponents of easing the restrictions are irate. They're really surprised and really upset because they thought that this was, you know, this administration was kind of an administration that would not let politics get in the way of a scientific decision. You mentioned Susan Wood. She resigned from the FDA under the Bush administration because that administration had delayed a similar easing of restrictions, and so people are very upset on that side.
And briefly, Rob, is there any next step here beyond the political repercussions? Is there more to come on the health side or on policy side?
Well, there's still a lawsuit pending against the FDA. One of the activist groups filed a lawsuit many years ago because of the delays in easing the restrictions, and there's actually a hearing scheduled for December 13th on a contempt of court motion against the FDA for failing to ease the restrictions. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The judge in that case had been very critical about the idea that politics might be interfering with a scientific decision.
All right, Rob Stein of the Washington Post. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.